whole host of wonderful people for us to talk to. This is called Northamptonshire, Back from the Brink. And we're going to talk about how you take a council from having looked over the edge of the cliff back to a most successful outcome. I've got with me Matt Golby, the leader of the council. Matt, would you like to introduce your elected colleagues who are online with us today?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. So I'm Matt Golby, the leader of Northampton County Council. We've got Councillor Lizzie Bowen, who's our deputy leader, Councillor Jason Smithers, who's the cabinet member for Place and Highways, Councillor Fiona Baker, who's the cabinet member for Children's Services, and we were expecting our colleague Councillor Malcolm Longley, who's the cabinet member for Finance, but he's not with us yet.
He's probably still counting the money. And then Teresa Grant, the Chief Executive, would you like to introduce your two colleagues?
Good morning. I'm Teresa Grant, Chief Executive of Northamptonshire County Council and also Strategic Delivery Director for Local Government Reform. And with me, I have my colleague Anna Earnshaw, who was previously my deputy and is now the Chief Executive for West Northants Council, and also my colleague Barry Scarr, who is my Section 151 genius. Okay, yeah. And we also have Tony McArdle, who is the government's commissioner, no less. And we'll be coming back to Tony in a minute. But Matt, start the journey for us. What was it like on the day that the council declared itself unfit to carry on with spending money?
Well, what a journey we've been on, Nick. It has been absolutely incredible. And if I think back to some of those dark days, it wasn't just one single moment, I don't think. It was coming. You know, we had elections in 2017 and we had a whole new cohort of councillors. And the narrative at the time was, we're running out of money, government need to do something about it. And you know, everybody was bought into that, and obviously other authorities around the country had dealt with austerity, and the criticism for Northamptonshire was that it just hadn't sort of faced up to it properly, really. There had been lots of initiatives. There was something called the Next Generation Council, which basically outsourced a lot of the sort of central functions of the council. But slowly but surely and inevitably, the sort of wheels came off, and a 114 notice was declared. And that was happened at a very similar time. We had the Max Caller Best Value report, you know, probably instigated by the MPs and government because of the noises coming out of the county council. And to me, that was the turning point of the whole journey. Certainly for me personally, because the day that was publicised, the previous leader said, "I'm going to read out this statement, and then I'm going to get up and walk out." And I was the deputy leader at the time, so I literally had to pick up the pieces, face national and international media. We had Sky News, Channel 4, news from across the world, Japanese, the French, everybody, the Americans were interested in what was happening to us in Northamptonshire, which was quite remarkable. So it wasn't just one event, but when it did happen, it was a huge moment, and we just had to. My view was, well, we've got to do the best job we can. We're elected members, you know, that have got that duty to do what we can for the residents, for the people of Northamptonshire. And certainly, I was very clear from day one that I'm going to give this my best shot, and you know, we're going to do our best to get out of it. But it was a very challenging situation.
Well, thank you for that. It was the first time in 20 years that notice had been issued by a local authority, and suddenly you were the poster child for how everything can go wrong. And Anna, what was it like for you, as you were one of the senior officer team? It's pretty tough seeing everyone talking in the negatives about what you've been working hard on. How did you feel, and how did your colleagues feel at the time?
Well, I remember sort of reflecting, you know, sort of first, my God, you know, I'm going to lose my job and I've done nothing wrong, and feeling how very unfair it all was, not just for me, but for the staff. You know, everyone had continued to work so hard. We'd all done our job. We'd all tried our best. And you know, personally, we tried to get senior colleagues to recognise that we clearly had an issue. And you know, as a relative newcomer at that time and a director newly in, I felt quite betrayed. And even when I was sort of trying to draw people's attention to what were clearly financial problems, and people wouldn't listen, and it just felt as if all the wrong people were being sort of punished for something that they had tried so hard to avoid. So it felt really, really unfair and really, really desperate times, actually, very lonely times.
And I've listened to people in the past who've had problems in the councils. It must be hard when you're really good at your work, you're really dedicated at your work, coming into that environment where everyone is feeling so demoralised by the overall effects. It must have been really tough to walk in that door every day.
It was, and I think for staff out there as well, it was challenging in a world because we were talking about such big figures, and we had to take everybody on a journey. And I know Teresa, really led this too, to making people understand that during those bad times, every decision that everybody made every day mattered. Because when you're talking about big figures and financial bankruptcy, it's kind of hard for people to understand how you work your way out of it. And I remember certainly in adults, I inherited a service that was 26 million overspent, I think, in that first year, and saying to people, every single case you make a decision on, every single time you decide to spend something, it makes a difference, and they soon add up. And we had to really, really change everyone's belief and culture around the fact that each of us had a responsibility to work our way out of it. And I have to say that the staff have been brilliant at owning that and turning it around.
Well, the guest that's not actually on here are all the staff, and I will try and keep mentioning it's been a team effort from top to bottom of this journey. Tony, so you get this phone call from the Secretary of State asking if you're busy. And how do you react to something like that? You're a chief executive of some years of experience, walking in the door to a local authority that's had, I suppose, a heart attack on every level, financially and emotionally. How do you start as a commissioner?
Well, there's no rule book for that, Nick. There's no guidebook because it doesn't happen very often. I think this is the fourth intervention of this, statutory intervention in the 20 years the Act's been on the book, which allows it to happen in this way. We did look at what our predecessors had done in other places, but it wasn't easy to read across what had happened in Tower Hamlets or in Rotherham. I think my colleague Brian and I were focused on the fact that we couldn't rationalise why the authority needed to be in the position that it did. And of course, all the headlines at the time were about money and the lack of money in the area. But curiously, the authority I'd been working for the previous 12 years, and the authority which my colleague Brian, the Finance Commissioner, had been working for a similar length of time, Lincolnshire and Leicestershire councils, respectively, both had more money per head of the population than Northamptonshire ever. Had less money than Northamptonshire ever had. So there was no obvious reason why Northamptonshire should be in a position that it was. And what we had to quickly establish was where the root causes of the difficulty were, because it was presented as a financial problem, but actually the finance was the symptom rather than the problem. Northamptonshire didn't fail because it ran out of money. It ran out of money because it failed, and the failure came first. So it was getting in behind that that set the tone for the first few months. That said, of course, the first priority was to get the books to balance, and that does require the sort of thing that Anna was talking about. It's about every single member of staff pulling every single stop out that they can to not spend any more money than is absolutely necessary, as well as putting the right strategies in place, the right procedures, and a good sound plan for financial recovery. So finance focuses the attention, but actually it's the underlying difficulties that cause the financial problem that you've got to concentrate on.
Now, the powers invested in you were the members' powers. So what was what were the powers that you had?
It's pretty challenging because 20 years as a council chief executive, of course, one of the key things that you have to do is stop officers getting into the space that members should probably be in. So I spent 20 years telling people off for doing something that I was now being recruited to do, because you're right, none of the powers that I had in the last 3 years, or Brian, were officer powers. So people like Teresa and Anna had all of the statutory responsibility and power that goes with those positions. The powers that came to us from the Secretary of State, and of course that is the constitutional position. It isn't us who have the power. The Secretary of State holds the powers because he's taken them off the council. He simply discharges them through commissioners. And in specifically to Northamptonshire, those responsibilities were the financial strategy of the authority, the governance of the authority, and the appointment of the authority's senior staff.
Really important, because that is something I'm going to pick up with the members, because effectively you were coming in and stepping into their space, but at the same time it's still their council when they're walking down the street with the elected, with the electorate. So we'll come back to that. After your appointment, the chief exec and the 151 officer left. Was that when Teresa walked in?
Yes, we had interims in both of those roles, and those came to an end. And it was fundamental in our view, if you were going to repair the management of the council, that you get the best quality senior management in place that you can. No council needed it more. In fact, and Teresa will, I'm sure, remember this, the letter which we wrote to accompany the invitation to apply said, we want someone who wants to do the toughest job in local government. So we ran a very speedy process.
So she can't come back to you and say that you didn't tell her the truth.
No, absolutely not. It was on the label. It was on the top of the tin when she opened it. Yeah,
that's important. Anna, how did you feel when you heard that Teresa was one of the candidates? Resignation straight away, or what was the feeling?
No, we were quite lucky in a sense as a senior team, and there weren't very many of us there. We all got to meet the candidates just before, and I remember sort of being asked what we thought, and one of the candidates obviously being, in my view and some of our views, kind of a healer type, if you like, that would make us all feel a lot better. And I said, well, do we all want to feel a lot better, or do we all want to change this for the better? And if we wanted to change it for better, and we wanted to take it by the scruff of the neck, then Teresa was the person that we wanted. So no, I think it was very welcome, and I think we all felt a massive sea change when Teresa walked in the door and we had that first meeting that kind of set direction.
Teresa, Anna has just beautifully teed it up for you to say. You knew what you were coming into. You've been highly successful in Trafford, with a fantastic reputation. Coming into Northamptonshire, what were you thinking?
I think it was, as Tony's alluded to, it was advertised as the most difficult job in local government, and I felt somebody had to do it, and I wanted to do it. And I think it was substantially undersold, but nonetheless, it was an interesting place to come into. And, I hope I've done some of the healing as well as some of the shaking it up. I was the fourth chief exec in 8 months, so quite a difficult environment to come into, with staff really demoralised, and I think Anna's described that really well. People were in their bunkers, so for protection, because they all felt very threatened, and their jobs were threatened and their services were threatened. So there wasn't a lot of collaboration. It was silo working for protectionism, and that was really understandable. So reassuring people it was safe to come out was the first thing really I had to do. But then when they came out, I had to also reassure them I wasn't going to make life easy. I was going to make it difficult. And that's if we were going to turn it around. So building that team from an early stage was crucial, really, and making sure I had the right team. And I had never worked for commissioners before, so that was a completely new experience for me. And I wasn't sure what to expect. And now I hear today Tony telling me I had all the powers. He never told me that 3 years ago. But we did work it's a triumvirate, I would describe it, between the cabinet, the commissioners, and the senior management team. It wasn't just one element. It was the three elements that came together in a way that made it work.
Well, I'm going to get the cabinet to join in, because they're all writing down their little notes about what has been said so far, and they'll have their say very shortly. But this wasn't about cutting services, and this is where I find the whole story really fascinating. You then went into the fastest, most dramatic transformation program that I think anyone's ever seen. There are a few councils, I think, under the spotlight and the financial pressures that you had to do the transformation that you've undertaken. So Barry and Anna, how did you start that journey?
Well, I think, interestingly, we started with what we called the scary list, which I've mentioned before, where we kind of looked at how bad, in a sense, would it have to be to recover just by cutting services. And we kind of looked over that precipice and thought, my God, can you imagine the consequences of that? And then we kind of stepped back from that and said, right, together we've got to do this. And Teresa often talks about the long workshops with pizza. And, we're staying here until, as a senior management team, we work out how to do things together and find ways to transform. And we started that journey, but we first of all had a look at how bad it would be, and we all agreed that that was not what we wanted. And we went on together. We got some new people in, a new transformation director, Paul, who was really good and brought new blood. And we worked together on finding ways forward, learning from other areas, all the things that we could do, help from the commissioners too.
Barry, you've been with the team quite a bit now, and I've been teasing about which bank did you rob, and we'll get into the financial outcomes, which I think are just mind-blowingly amazing what you've all achieved as a team. But what was it like when you're holding the fort on the money and you've got all this turmoil, and then you decide to change everything? Because you've got to invest in some places to make change, haven't you?
That's right, Nick. And I would say by the time I arrived, I've been at Northamptonshire for 18 months. What I would call a lot of the infrastructure behind the financial scenes had already been implemented by my predecessor. So a lot of the stuff that you would do with loans and treasury in particular had already been done. So it was very much a focus on service and transformation. And Councillor Baker will remember some of the conversations that we had about children's in particular, which was fluctuating wildly at the time. And there was a need for stability in children's for to bring the position back into balance. But once that was done, I think moving into the current year, there was a number of things happened, which is that based on the lessons that we learned from previous years, we've been able to rebase the budget, swap around, as you say, the money that needed to be invested in services, and recognise services like Anna's in particular that have been delivering transformation year on year. We're going to continue delivering that transformation as well. And I think we've alluded to leadership and culture as well, but I think at turning around any organisation, there comes a time when the systems, the processes, the culture, and the finances start to align, and it starts to get a bit of momentum behind it. And I think 2021 was the year that happened. And I know we haven't mentioned COVID-19, but all of that coming together at once enabled us to take that on the chin and move forward.
That's extraordinary. On top of everything else, COVID-19 comes along. And I talk to councils all over the country. They're sort of saying about rebuilding this. You just took it in your stride. I sound completely sold on the whole fact that the fan thing. Teresa, when you look at the change, how long did it take for morale to start to lift? Did it take you a year to get into the stride for people to suddenly realise they were back on the road to excitement? And what was that like?
I don't think we had time really to change in the way you would normally in an organisation. We had to change very quickly if we were to recover the situation. And I arrived in the very end of July 2018, and we weren't even really clear about what our deficit was at that time. And I remember, working through with commissioners, where did we think we were? And we worked that out probably by end of August, that we were actually overall, over 2 years, about 65 million in deficit. And that was mid-year. So we didn't have long to recover. And we were looking at that precipice that Anna referred to about, going back to core services. And I just couldn't see that happen. So we decided not to do that. And somebody asked me recently, what's the hardest decision I've had to make? And it was making a decision not to do something rather than to do something. And making that decision not to cut services was a high-risk decision because we had to balance the books in year. But I didn't want to do so much damage that we could never undo that. So we set about transformation rather than slash and burn policy. So it was, a tight time scale. We also had to set a budget for the following year during that period of time, which was another 43 million of savings on top. So, the fact that people were overwhelmed by the high numbers made it quite difficult to get people's heads around those things that Anna talked about, just making those little savings. And I saw a difference between the first workshop I held at the end of August, which was the let's all hide in our bunkers and not give up any savings because somebody else will take them or they'll make my services worse. And then we had another workshop the following February 19, and we still needed to identify at that point, I think it was about £12 million in savings. And we were 2 months out from financial year end. And I said I was going to hold another marathon workshop. And actually, it took half the time of the previous workshop. We identified £13 million in savings and we balanced with an underspend on year end. And that to me was the marker where the culture had changed, where people's approach, attitude had changed. People came with their ideas, with their very generous approaches to helping other people save money. Nobody was in a silo. And it was a very different kind of management team by that point in time. People wanted to succeed. They wanted to share.
That's great. Matt, all this time, lots going on. You've got a fantastic team. Fiona, Lizzie, Malcolm, I'm starting to see a link with Barry. I'm starting to use which one I'm talking here, but it must be something to do with finance.
The glasses.
So, for you as the cabinet, the commissioners technically have all your power. You have all the accountability because you were elected. It's all your fault. The opposition didn't go away. We won't talk about your own group because no one ever talks about their own group. But I'm assuming you had a few group meetings that were a bit hairy about some of the things you did. What was it like for you during this journeys when you got Theresa coming in, you got Tony hovering around, sort of saying what's happening, and you got officers changing? What was it like to be the leader and with your cabinet?
Well, we felt an enormous responsibility to play a part in it, and when people like Tony came through the door, I made a point of welcoming them and saying, we're pleased you're here. We want to be a part of the solution moving forward. And to be fair to Tony, he's always been open, and that style of working has sort of carried on running through. As Theresa mentioned, we've had this sort of triumvirate of the three of us, the cabinet, senior officers and the commissioners. So I tried to make it very clear, and cabinet were highly motivated to stay relevant and play a full part in this all the way through. And I think we've done that quite successfully, I would say. But, to reiterate the point, I think the point that we're at now is it's all because of teamwork. We've had a really good teamwork, whether that's between the cabinet and the challenge that they've given me, certainly as leader, the senior officers and the commissioners. And yeah, our group, as I mentioned, when in 2017 we had over half a set of brand new councillors, and they've been highly motivated as well to try and do the right thing and move things forward. But that's been the guiding principle for me through thick and thin, and there's been some awfully challenging times through this, is to do the right thing, do our duty on behalf of the residents of Northamptonshire, and show that local democracy has got a part to play in repairing itself and taking responsibility. And that's the sort of notion and way we've tried to carry on through this.
Lizzie, you've been the deputy, and I've got to know you all, and you're the great organizer, and you're always there. You've got your eye on what's going on around you. How tough has it been to manage the political side of this? Because in one respect, you're slightly out of it. You put yourselves in the heart and centre of it all, but you've still got the cabinet meetings. You've still got questions from the opposition. How tough has all of that been to keep driving through and keep that public face going for you?
I think it's been incredibly tough, as you would expect. I only got elected in 2017 and was in the cabinet within 6 months. On adult social care with Anna Earnshaw. And from the outset, I think the fact that I was the newbie in and was the new elected group meant that I could be the spokesperson for all of those new candidates. And then we had the established people like Matt as leader, who had been around a lot longer. And between us, and with the rest of the cabinet, we carved out people's roles in that cabinet as to who was best to deal with what. And yes, there were some real soul-searching times, but there was also a lot of support because we all felt we had to be the change we wished to see. And that drove us to work with Theresa, Barry, and Tony and Brian and Chrissy, and know that they were giving us the direction, but we were also giving them direction. And between us, we sort of, we saw it through. Yeah.
There's a big change. Fiona, I watched you take on some tremendous challenges, and I watched you do it with great style. You know, being in charge of children's services as an elected member is not anything that can be sort of taken lightly. You never did, and your challenges there was the financial cost, there was also the reality of protecting and looking after the children in the care of the council. What was it like for you to be in that enormous position? Because at one point, we'll bring in Malcolm a bit later, look across the cabinet table and say, well, you're spending all the money, Fiona. Sit there going, but I'm doing a very good job for children. So there were some really tough moments for you on every level going, weren't there?
There were, and as you know, you were there on some of those occasions. And I always used to say, I'm going to sit by the door, and if you shout at me, I'm leaving.
Never did though, did you?
I never left, no.
Almost.
Yeah, almost. But I think the role of lead member for children and anything to do with children's services is such an emotive subject and is so difficult. And the only time you actually come to the forefront of the public is when something horrendously goes wrong. And, you know, we've got horrendous things happening to children. And then obviously, you know, you're the worst person on earth. And I have had to stand there and take that in my time as well. And I wouldn't want ever to have to do that, but I do know that's part of the role. I, like Lizzie, was a new councillor in 2017 to the county, although I had been a district councillor for 10 years prior to that. And I arrived probably like Lizzie and several others and thought, crikey, what's going on here? Or words to that effect. And we thought, because we're very motivated people, we thought we need to actually get our feet in this and see what's going on. And I was an assistant cabinet member for adults and children for a while. And then I became the lead member 2.5 years ago. It was exceedingly challenging. We had a team in at the time that were not gelling and working well together. We had a commissioner, we had a DCS, we had a lot of interim people, a lot of part-time people that were only here for a short time, and the whole system was not gelling at all well. And it was exceedingly challenging. We are now in a place where, and I kind of think it was to do with changing our commissioners, and we had Andrew Christie and an assistant commissioner in Claire Chamberlain. They came in with a totally different look at things. Teresa has always been challenging. We know that, but we have a very good relationship. I often am challenging too, and we have a few words, but it's fine. We just, once that happened, and we seemed to have a different sort of atmosphere, and people seemed to settle more. But actually, like Teresa said, everybody was hiding under the desk more or less to see what was going to happen next. And children's, I think, were the worst affected. They had an inadequate service, and in order to try and do something about that, they threw money at it, which was hemorrhaging money, which was having to be borrowed from other areas, and wasn't working at all. So it really needs stripping back. And I know that Teresa has had many challenging times with this stripping back. We had to save money without cutting services. And it has been challenging, as this is challenging, always working from home when the postman comes.
But that was a fascinating sort of because I was there in the cabinet meeting when the reality of more money does not equate to better services, and that was quite a counterintuitive move for you to take on board. That throwing the money was not taking you to improvement; it was creating even more problems than you had at the time, which I think was a big step for any group of people, because you're talking about a young person's life if you get it wrong, whichever way you go. And I think I'm going to go up to Jason, who's on top of my screen. Jason, you've always made me smile. You're probably your instincts of the political play have always been absolutely smack on, and you've been there all the way through on that, because it's still a political world, isn't it?
Much so, Nick, you have to be quite mindful of what impact decisions have on a daily basis to the political
ability to be re-elected, and I think that's something that I've always been quite mindful of. Also, though, looking at budgets, and I just love what you've just said, more money doesn't always equal a better service. In my view, it feeds the beast. And one thing we have brought in when Theresa came in as the chief exec was this ability to be told no, where before I don't think that word was used very much. And you know, if you wanted something, you had to fight for it. Really, you had to show that there was a real need. And I think if you took a sensible plan through to Theresa and the senior leadership team, you know, you were rewarded. You got what you needed, and so on. Even if that just did mean going for a cup of coffee when Theresa set the fire alarm off on purpose one afternoon. But no, I mean, it you know. What we've got to do is we've got to take a step back here, and I can't help but sort of labour over this. I mean, when Theresa answered the advert which Tony had put out there saying the toughest job in local government, you know, whoever thought that COVID would be around the corner? I guess we knew local government reform was on its way and was going to be part of it. And doing a children's trust, you think all of those elements while doing this, you know, fantastic turnaround is just absolutely amazing to the commissioners, to the senior leadership team, which Theresa heads up, and also to the cabinet as well, you know, where we've all pushed the same way. We tried our absolute best, and look, it has paid dividends, you know, I'm exceptionally proud to have been part of that journey. I mean, I came in just pretty much as Theresa came in, I think probably a couple of months before Theresa, you know, when it was all, well, I think as Matt said, the wheels were coming off and so on. And you know, we were under the spotlight of international and national media. Yes, so it was challenging in the early days. And, you know, Matt has done a fantastic job. One thing he always said he was going to put this council back into the best position he could for the 2 new unitaries. I think it's fair to say with the commissioners and Theresa's senior leadership team and the cabinet that has happened, and I think, you know, come Thursday when Theresa has to hand over those keys to Anna and Rob Bridge, you know, it's going to be a testing day, and you know, and I don't think anyone should underestimate the amount of work that has gone into this through Theresa and the team and the commissioners and the cabinet as well.
Well, Jason, thank you for what you've just done. Is bring in the added complexity of local government reorganisation, a children's trust, and this thing called COVID. It's really, and you're still standing, which is remarkable. I just want to go in now, if I may, to Malcolm, and you may refer back to Barry, because you see, Malcolm, you were amazingly confident all the way through. You gave the figures in the cabinet meeting. You told us exactly where the changes were and everything else. But I now see that you've got a double, and it was, you know, what you were feeding off Barry's script, weren't you? Come on.
Definitely. I'll start at the beginning. When I was first asked to take on the job, I wasn't very keen. Didn't want the job, and the reason for that, I'd already written 3 papers, and they'd been completely ignored. And so I remember saying to Val, I'm wasting my bloody time here. I remember that's exactly what I felt about it. Anyway, good old smooth talking Matt talked me into it. And I remember going to the first group meeting and saying, look, I'm a reluctant bride. I really am. And but again, life went on, and I remember Theresa, and I think it was after the first seminar you'd had Theresa, and he'd say, well, no, these guys know what they're doing. And I remember saying, well, Theresa, we're on our way. I don't know if you recall that. You probably don't recall it. And from that point on, I probably had the easiest job in the cabinet, because I have a situation where Ian Duncan, Barry, who, by the way, we met on a motorway cafe once by the time we got to know each other, and Theresa, you got Tony. I've got to include Tony, but Brian was very, very good. So you've got a team there. And you've got to bear in mind that the ops are the people that spend the money. So Anna was the first to break out, and then it got better and better then. And you ended up, and I think the best way I can do it is quote Carnegie. You know, I had that's what he said. I had the ability to employ better people than myself, and absolutely sums it up. The top class, piece of cake, the job once you've got people of that quality. And I think that really sums it up for me, Nick.
Very good. Teresa, halfway along, you got the job of splitting the council up and leading the reorganisation of Northamptonshire into 2 unitaries. They always say, give a busy person another job and they'll do it well. Did that make it more complicated, or did it start to create a cleaner structure for you in the transformation?
I think it would have been more difficult had I not been leading that, because the county council was such a large part of the future unitaries, and we had to disaggregate. So we had to split our county council in 2. And as the largest portion of the overall, if you weren't leading that, it would have been extremely difficult to be on the receiving end of that. So whilst I had to get agreement from the commissioners to be able to take on that role as well, because it wasn't actually in my job description or remit, and we had an organisation at that point that still needed turning around and still needed recovery. But working with the districts and boroughs and the chief execs there, and I set up what I call distributed leadership. So everybody had a role to play and everybody had responsibility in delivering the programme. So it was really a collective effort across the 8 councils. And the same with the political governance, which was distributed leadership as well. So all the leaders of 8 councils came together and they were overseeing it. So I was effectively reporting into 8 leaders. So it was quite a challenge and daunting. I had never done that before. I've done transformation and I've done recovery, but I had never ever delivered 2 brand new councils from a blank sheet of paper. And we did start with the blueprint and built up from there. And then of course COVID came along in the middle of that, which was a slightly more challenge. So we had to kind of rethink our strategy. But key for me in delivering the 2 unitaries was to make sure that we delivered transformation and not just create 2 old councils that reflected the old, but actually created 2 new councils that were better, that were more efficient, more effective, and that actually served the residents and did what the residents deserved rather than carry forward the old. And I think we've been really successful in doing that. We have really created already, you can see, 2 new cultures. We've given them a great legacy to start with reserves of almost 100 million to pass over to the 2 unitaries.
Okay, hold on. Repeat that again.
Reserves of almost 100 million. I think we're at about
an organisation that was 65 million in a black hole, and you are giving a dowry to 2 new authorities of just under 50 million each.
Yeah, and Barry will correct my figures. I've no doubt. I think we're at about 97 at the moment, but I'd like to round it up to a nice even 100. And he's got another
sofa behind you, Barry. I don't know whether you want to look down the back of the sofa or anything, but I wouldn't upset Teresa on that one if you. But that's just mind blowing, Teresa, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't underestimate the scale of the challenge there. People have had to work really, really, really hard to achieve that alongside COVID. And we make it sound easy, but it's actually all of the staff and the frontline staff who were, responding to the COVID challenges, who kept us going through the last year, as well as those people who've continued to work on delivering local government reform and a children's trust. So, to me, it's the success is the success of the workforce. It's not mine. It's a collective accountability and responsibility, and the other 7 districts and borough councils as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Tony, I understand that you have the right to issue directives, and you have never had to use that legal form to achieve anything in the 3 years. You've actually led these 3. The 3 parts have all worked so that you've never been forced to take that power. Is that right?
Well, as Matt knows, that was an arrangement that we effectively came to on day one, because we arrived with all of these powers that have been, given to us by the Secretary of State to use. And of course, we were perfectly prepared to use them. And if you look at previous interventions, they're used on a regular basis. And we have a responsibility to the Secretary of State to make sure the authority makes sensible decisions, which it had previously not been doing, that its governance arrangements are sound and transparent, and that it scrutinises the decisions that it makes, and that it handles its finances well. So it's quite an array of responsibilities. And I suppose the easiest way for us to discharge it is to issue directions, because then we can be happy that the things that we believe should be happening are happening. But Matt and I spoke on day one with Brian, and he said, as he just said on a few moments ago, that he wanted to lead, do the right things to get this council back to where it should be, and that they were determined to do the right things in the face of what had been happening in previous years. So what we agreed was we would seek to not use any of our powers, but that had to be on the basis that we were involved throughout, as we have been pretty intensively, hence the reference to this triumvirate. We've been involved right from the start, any initiative, any plan, any process. So we were fully read into the arrangement, the operating arrangements, the authority, so that we could make it clear where the parameters lay, if you like, for good decision making. And if that worked, and the decisions that were made by the authority were based on evidence, that were transparent, that were well scrutinised, that were safe, then we would not worry what those decisions were. They could make the political choices that they wished, as any authority normally does, but within the parameters of that safe, those safe parameters. And to do that, we had to be involved in everything. So we've been involved in everything. It's been a much more intense engagement than I think perhaps we'd expected over the 3 years. And the other thing, and Matt will remember this, I think, well, we said, and this only lasts as long as the first failure. Because what we're not doing as commissioners is putting ourselves in a position whereby we won't use our powers so that you can make the easy decisions, but when it gets tough, you pass them to us to do because it's politically uncomfortable. That's not going to happen. And if it does happen, then the deal's off, as it were, and we will then issue directions in order to see the authority through. And we agreed that, which was an easy thing to agree at the time, I think. There have been a few moments, and we know it's been difficult through the course of the 3 years when that was challenged. But it's held, and 3 years in, we've not issued a single direction. We've achieved the aims that we were charged with by the Secretary of State, that Matt has sought to achieve politically, that Theresa has sought to put in place managerially, because we've all worked closely together within the parameters set to achieve the aim of recovering this authority.
Matt, the size of this journey cannot be underestimated, and sometimes it's very easy to walk away. You were the former children's lead member. You've taken it on the chin. You've been in front of the press. It would be very easy to say, I don't need this in my life. I'll go back to my day job, and why am I here? I'm picking up the pieces for a million other reasons. I don't think you thought about that, did you?
Not really, no. The overriding driver, as some of the cabinet have articulated, Nick, is that duty to show that, we've got the nous between us to apply ourselves, work with colleagues, whether it's the officers or the commissioners, and get through this and do this. And you talk about measuring. You can measure in terms of finance. But another big point has been the relationships as well, and especially around the LGR journey. When the wheels came off with the county council, they did in a real big way, and our stock was in real negative. In terms of the relationships with the districts and boroughs, with a lot of our strategic partners, with the MPs, and with government, of course. And I think that's a big point that needs to be emphasised in this, is the way we've worked really hard on those relationships, to a point that when COVID did come, we the way the districts and boroughs and the county council were working together, we've cut through a lot of the real bad stuff, and the response in Northamptonshire to COVID was really good. So I think that's something that's important to mention. But to me, it's always been about duty. I've just been highly motivated all the way through, knowing that we're going to have to take some heat, and we've done that. We've I publicly apologised way back, and said, as Jason said, well, I'm going to do my very best to deliver the county council come the end in the best shape possible as we head into unitary, and also the finances. And I'm really pleased, I'm really proud that we're sitting here having this conversation today, talking about things like nearly £100 million worth of reserves. It is quite remarkable. So, you know, I'm just really, really proud, and thank everybody on the call, as you reminded me to do at the start. You know, it's been an incredible journey, and but to us as a political cabinet group, it's a bit about showing that we've got a part to play. We want to take responsibility, and we want to drive this through all the way to the very end.
Well, I have to say, sitting in the cabinet room, I never saw a single one of you flinch from those tough decisions. And I think some of the toughest that Tony was alluded to, I was in the room for, and they weren't easy. And it would have been easy to have walked out and gone to the car park and driven off. But you found that energy, and I respect you for all of that. I want to talk about what you've learned going forward and how that's going to affect the changes. But I think it's time now, if Verity can do this for us, is to invite the Secretary of State to give his address, which is recorded on Friday for you all. And we'll see what he has to say. This is always great with technology.
I'm delighted to be able to send this message to mark the end of the existing councils in Northamptonshire and to greet the new ones. I'm only sorry that this event, like so many others over the course of the last 12 months, has had to be held virtually. I know one of the achievements has been to build trust and relationships that at one time would have seemed impossible. So it would have been nice to mark this moment in a more personal way. But nonetheless, I hope that the store of goodwill that's been established will stand the new councils in good stead as they take on their full suite of powers tomorrow. The best value review that we conducted said that finding a way forward would require a clean sheet, leaving the past behind. And together you have achieved that. I know that the work remains unfinished and the pandemic has significantly impacted on your transformation plan. I very much hope that as we move out of COVID, you will be able to redouble your efforts and move forwards together. Local government has been and remains on the front line of the battle against the pandemic, a beacon of hope, providing the services that we've all relied on every day. But despite those obstacles, you've not only continued to provide those services, but also brought about new councils, whilst establishing the Children's Trust, all in a very short period of time. So my message is simply, thank you, thanks for the enormous efforts that you've been able to bring this about. It's truly appreciated. In particular, I'd like to thank the commissioners, Tony, Brian, and their chief of staff, Chrissy, who has worked tirelessly and effectively to stabilise the government and the finances of the county council and lay the foundations for restructuring and for growth. I'd also like to thank the shadow executives, especially Councillor Ian McCord and Councillor Russell Roberts, as well as Teresa Grant and so many others. This is a new start for Northamptonshire and for local government in the area. I know that you will seek to uphold the highest standards of transparency, accountability and probity, and to give local people, and especially the vulnerable in society who deserve and need a high-performing council, the council that Northamptonshire now deserves. Best wishes for the future.
Well, there we are.
Yeah, very good.
We don't have the new council, the nominated council leaders for the new councils, but that's nice of them to be wished. Tony, I think that you know, nice to be told that you've done a good job from the boss. Always good. And Teresa, but you know, it really is a fantastic story that you've all been through. Someone phoned me up the other day, a council leader, and said, would you hire a finance director, a 151 officer, who had signed a section 141 notice? And I said, if they didn't cause it, I think it's awfully good to know what it looks like so that you don't go there again. What do you think, Barry?
That's a very difficult question, Nick. I think, you know, the local government at the moment is increasingly finding itself under pressure, either through COVID or through the previous grant regimes. And I think as a professional director of finance, you feel the need to point out that things are going badly, and with the in consultation with the chief exec and the monitoring officer, issue that section 114. And I think that sets the boundary in that you will then come under considerable pressure not to do so by many other stakeholders. And I think for me, the mark of the professional finance director is you've got to push that through if that's what you believe.
A tough role all the way through this, and I think that few people will always appreciate that, and I think that has been amazing. Malcolm, I have to tell you, represented you incredibly well in the cabinet. It was a right double act. Now I've met you. Fiona, the Children's Trust is a great achievement. It was, I know that there was a lot of conversation, is the trust the solution? And it was clearly felt towards the end that that was the right mechanic and everything else. How do you feel about where you've got the Children's Services now with all the team and the Children's Trust going forward?
The Children's Trust, I believe, is the way forward at the moment, because I think I know our service was far too fragile to be split into two and separated out in that way. I was very, very keen to make sure that we had our Ofsted inspection before our council closed down, so that the good news that came out of that about how I term it is that we're like an oil tanker, and we had to stop it turning that way first of all and make it straight. We are now straight. We're ready to turn right and go up towards good. And there's quite a lot of things that came out of our recent Ofsted letter that were very encouraging, and we have worked very hard to get to that place. And I wanted us to be in that place before the trust took over, really. But I think the trust is a good thing. I think we've got good people working in it. And obviously the really good people that we had before are still in that service. They just transferred over. So we've got a good DCS overseeing them. I hope also to be overseeing them in the future, but that's obviously unknown at the moment. But I have made sure that I've been involved in every element of the service. I've talked to social workers. I've been in every department. People do know who I am in the Children's Service, and I think that's a good way for the lead member to go forward. And I intend to do the same thing in Trust.
I think that's fantastic. Jason, you weren't going to stand. You are standing. So the political bug hasn't left you yet. How are you going to look forward? What does this mean for you going forward?
Well, I think Matt had invited me in at an early stage into the whole LGR process as his stand-in councillor as we went along, and I got a real taste for it, and I just felt that it would seem not quite right to sort of bail out quite yet, and the lure has certainly got me to go for another 4-year term, and as we are currently fighting elections at the moment, it reminded me why probably I didn't want to do it, but however, get elected and then we can get on with some work. But I think really from my perspective, it would really be I want to see this through at least for another 4-year term to see how LGR goes forward, and I'm in no doubt that it'll be a challenging journey ahead of us. It'd be foolish not to think that, but the foundations are solid. As Teresa has said, there's £100 million worth of reserves being divvied up there, and as well, and so with the right attitude, the right leadership and the right motivations, LGR will be a complete success, I'm sure.
Certainly going to be a fascinating journey for everyone to be on in both of the new authorities. Lizzie, when you're out on the doorstep, how do you feel now with the experience? You came in, it's a bit like congratulations, you've got a nice share of the debts and everything else. It must have been an absolute shock for you being elected into the post you have. You're now back out on the doorstep. You've been on a massive masterclass in how to be a lead member of a council. What does it mean for you now?
Okay, so we're not actually back out on the doorstep yet, Nick. Yeah, so we are following the government guidelines, and we will be, all being well, next week. For me, I'm a very positive can-do person, so I will go out and I will sell how well everybody's done, how we've all worked together, both at the county but also with the districts and the boroughs. We have a great, great future ahead. And like Fiona, I'm not sure where I will be in that future, but whatever happens, I feel blessed to have been part of this journey. It has been incredibly tough, but I have so enjoyed. I've actually done this sort of re-engineering in a commercial environment before, so I was fascinated to see how we would do within the public sector. And I can honestly tell you that the way that this has been conducted is very much as you would conduct in a business environment, which has been really good to see. It's been incredibly professional. And the way we've selected those key staff members for the future has been what you would do in the commercial sector and business sector. And I think for our residents, that's important to know, that we are going to manage these authorities like you would manage a business. This is about taxpayers' money, and we want to give them best value for money. And I feel absolutely sure that with the team in the north and the team in the west, we will do that very successfully.
Wow, Teresa, it's nearly over. The keys have got to be handed back. You know, you can't keep them forever. A remarkable journey for you to be on, Teresa. How are you going to feel when you walk out the door?
Well, it's the second last day today, and it did feel very strange coming in this morning, I have to admit. I think the hardest bit will be handing the key of my office over to Anna. That's going to be the difficult moment, because that really will be like, that's it. And funnily enough, when I got here, the chief exec didn't have an office. They sat out in the middle of the floor with the rest of the team. So I didn't feel I could really have the conversations that needed to be had without an office. So it has become quite I suppose, the centre of the nerve centre. So handing that kind of over to Anna is going to be tough, but I know I know both the north and the west are in really good hands. So I'm quite relaxed about that. I think the future is bright and it's secure. It's leaving Northamptonshire County Council. I feel like I'm abandoning a baby, but it's no longer a baby. It's grown up, and it's been, it's now mature, and I'm ready to let it go, I suppose. And I'll miss the people more than I'll miss the job, to be honest. I'll really miss the people that I've met here and the friends that I've made, but it will be difficult. I don't deny it.
Tony, your mission that you undertook for the Secretary of State coming to an end. I'm not going to go about where you're also involved. You're a glutton for punishment, perhaps. But how do you reflect on this journey as a commissioner?
I think in a similar vein to has been expressed by others, Nick. I mean, I think it has been a success. We always knew right from the start that there was no obvious reason why this council needed to be in the difficulty that it got itself into. And that being the case, then it had to be possible to get it out of it, because the money was there, the staff there, the talent was obviously there, and the members were there saying all of the right things to us. So it just needed to be, we needed to put a structure in place to make that work, and a process and a degree of involvement, which has probably been much more intense than we'd expected because of the way I explained earlier we sought to work.
Yeah.
But it has been, as the months have gone past, we've been able to see progress happen. Sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but always moving forward. And I think we share the view that has been expressed by the members and the officers here. We're very pleased with it. We are, I think, quite proud of it, that 3 years on, what is being left to the people of Northamptonshire by this authority is immeasurably better than what was facing them 3 years ago.
Thank you. Anna, you're going on to lead a new authority, but you were there at the beginning as one of the officers. How do you feel now at this juncture?
Very proud, as people have said, really. I think a little while ago, people would have said that the West and Northampton councils, would have started their journeys and had a foundation in spite of everything the county council had done. But in fact, I think it's because of all the things it's done that we're going to start on such a strong foundation, and build on that success, which is a fantastic place to be, and a great testament to all the staff and all the officers and everyone involved.
Matt, you have led the council as you promised. You have every right to walk out the door in the next day or so. Very proud. What's it meant to you?
Well, it's meant everything. You know, I as I said, I put myself out there from day one and said publicly, you know, we're going to do our very best, and I've just been determined and supported by everybody on this call, and I'm really grateful for that. To actually do and set out and accomplish what we set out to achieve. So as I said, I'm just really proud. And to me, it's somebody from Northampton, from Northamptonshire, playing a part in putting back something that had gone wrong to leave it in a good place. And I'm just so proud that we've been able to do that. And you know, and just thank everybody enormously for their contributions, for the way we've worked together, for Tony from MHCLG, you know, listening to us on day one and say, we want to be a part of putting this back together, to Teresa and her team through all those trials and tribulations. And, you know, it's quite flippantly easy to say, well, it was quite easy just listening to you on this call now, but it has been really, really hard. And to my cabinet colleagues who have kept me on my toes, challenged me, but we've never once flinched from our responsibility, and that's been a key driver for me from the political side, I suppose. So it has been absolutely huge, but an absolute honour and a real privilege, and I'm just so pleased we're able to have this conversation today, Nick.
Well, look, thank you all of you for sharing your experience. It's so easy to be successful. It's so hard to have been on the journey that you've been, but you've earned your success. And I think if anyone needs to seek advice, you are now the biggest experts in the United Kingdom about how to lead a council back from the darkest of days in every sense. So thank you so much for sharing it, and congratulations to all of you. I wish those standing for election well, the new officers, and great luck with the new authority. Tony, next for you, and Teresa, go on holiday before someone phones you up from the ministry and gives you another council to run. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.